Welcome everybody to the latest Apiculture Online Hive Chat with NC State. We're here with members of the NC State Apiculture Program, as well as, of course, joined by the apiary inspectors of the North Carolina Department of Agriculture, as well as other special guests here too. We have a really great docket in store for you today. This is perhaps one of the most important times of the beekeeping calendar. And so for the last several apiculture webinars, we've been discussing about how to keep Varroa mites in control. And so this is really the height, the apex of when Varroa mites are in season. And so, you know, keeping them at bay is really a lot of what we need to be doing. So I'm going to kick it off as usual and start talking about the bees in season, and that is what the bees are doing right now and what you should be doing as a beekeeper in order to help them. And the way that we always think about this as beekeepers is the things in the immediate term, what we need to do right now, but then predicting what the bees are going to be doing 1 or 2 brood cycles from now. And so what you can do now to help them kind of 3 to 6 weeks later. And so, as I just alluded to, the things that you should be doing right now is monitoring for your Varroa mites. This is the entire topic about how to monitor for Varroa mites was the 2 weeks ago in our Apiculture Online 2 weeks ago. So if you weren't able to make that, definitely view the recording so that you can kind of understand the pros and cons about how to go about measuring your colonies, kind of doing a blood test of your colonies to see how healthy they are when it comes to Varroa mites. And if you haven't done it already, you absolutely must. You have to kind of, if you're going to keep healthy bees, you have to monitor for Varroa mites. If you've already done it, good for you, but don't be complacent. Make sure you do it again. Lewis presented some of the data on his colonies and really showed how they can go from being perfectly fine or even Varroa free to having really super high levels of Varroa just within a matter of a few weeks. So right now you want to be monitoring pretty much every time you go into your colony, at least, once every week or so at this kind of apex. Again, if the percentage of the mites, that is, you count the number of mites out of 300 bees, you take that number, you divide it by 300 or 3, and you get that percentage of mite prevalence, how many mites are within the colony. And if it's at 3% or above, your colony is in real trouble. And they're going to be in a real difficult situation going into winter, because the mite loads now and in the next month or so is the #1 predictor of overwintering success. So that the more and more mites you have, the less and less likely your colony is going to survive through the winter. So you definitely want to, hopefully you are below that, and that's great. But the only way to know is to measure it, and measure every single colony as well, because not all colonies are the same, even if they're in the same location. Now, another thing to remember, and something that we haven't really discussed, but it's not the Varroa mites actually that are killing colonies. It's actually the pathogens that they vector that kill the colonies. So there's a lot of different viruses, especially, that are transmitted by the Varroa mite. So this is just this litany of different pathogens that we find in honeybees. And this is only an abbreviated list. There's actually something like 3 or so dozen viruses. Is that right, Eshmael? About 3 dozen? Something like that, viruses in honeybees. And a lot of the major economically important ones are actively transmitted by Varroa. They act as like little hypodermic syringes and hypodermic needles, where they're passing these viruses from one bee to another. And so that's how you can get these really, really rampant pathogen infections within colonies, because the Varroa mite levels are so high. And so the way that this is manifest within the colony is you see what's known as parasitic mite syndrome. So if you have really high levels of mites and they're kind of passing around these pathogens to all the individuals within the colonies, as well as just the immune stress that the mites and these little vampire mites feeding on the bees themselves, that can just kind of result in these kind of liquidy, kind of sick-looking, almost brood disease-like larvae and pupae within the colony. And so if you see something like this, a lot of people this time of year can mistake it for things like sac brood or European foul brood or other things. Well, in actuality, it's not that at all. It's not a brood disease. It's these pathogens that are being transmitted by the Varroa mites. So if you can keep the Varroa mites in check, you won't get this parasitic mite syndrome. And again, this situation, if you see a colony with a brood pattern that looks like this, your bees are not going to do well. In fact, it's almost certain that they're not going to make it through the winter. Because again, this situation is very strongly associated with colony loss through the winter. Now, there is another associated symptomology, set of symptoms associated with PMS, parasitic mite syndrome, and that's known as IBDS, which stands for this kind of mouthful of idiopathic brood disease syndrome, which is the appropriate name for it. But in essence, what it is PMS, parasitic mite syndrome, without high levels of Varroa. So you can also get this situation of high pathogen levels associated with Varroa, even if you don't have really huge levels of Varroa. And the reason is because there's variation in how much pathogens, how many of these viruses that Varroa have. So if you have lots of Varroa, but your bees are healthy and you don't see PMS or anything like that, then there's probably low virus titers within that colony. But you can also have the opposite, which is what IBDS is, which is you have low levels of Varroa, but you have really problematic brood because they have high levels of virus. So it's really not just the Varroa. That's the only thing we can do about these health problems. We can only address the vector, but it's really this triangle between Varroa as the host, the viruses as the pathogens, and the honeybees as the ultimate host that they're affecting. And so be on the lookout for this kind of thing, and don't mistake it for any of the other brood diseases, because that will lead you off on a different trail that will result in misdiagnosing and mismanaging your bees, and they'll succumb to the Varroa mites. Because we have so many other experts on Varroa and bee management, I'm going to open this up and ask others if they have any comments about PMS, IBDS, or Varroa mites.
I think you hit the nail on the head. At this time of year, if you see a poor brood pattern, the first thing to do is to monitor your mites. That's probably going to be where your issue is. So start with the the top culprit.
Yeah, it's start with the obvious and then work your way down to the less obvious, I guess.
Right. And I would say also your goal is to be proactive, not reactive. If you're being reactive, you've probably lost the battle, and you may or may not be able to reel that colony back in if they're already looking like the photos that you showed, the poor brood.
Yep.
And so that's why monitoring is so important, so you can get ahead, because colonies can have a high mite load at this time of year and not really show those problems, but in 6 weeks, they're gonna look. If they have a high mite load now, they're gonna look really bad in 6 weeks. I promise you.
So that actually brings up my last slide in this segment here, which is again that looking 1 to 2 brood cycles ahead from now. So if you're doing all the things right now, then hopefully, as the bees are raising those all-important winter bees, and that's a subject that we'll cover at the next Apiculture Online, But those winter bees are these long-lived, they're very kind of literally fat. They have lots of fat bodies so that they have the energy to make it through the winter when they don't have, they can't fly from the hive for food and that kind of stuff. So as the colonies are raising those winter bees, you don't want them to be parasitized, because if they are, the Varroa mites feed on those fat bodies, and then they're malnourished going into winter, and they won't live as long, and then the colonies will die out. But also remember that 3 to 6 weeks from now, you definitely want to make sure that the bees are going into winter with enough winter food stores, primarily honey, to make sure that they have enough energy to keep warm all through the winter. Here in North Carolina, we have fairly mild winters and they don't last all that long, but it is all relative. The bees are still kind of going into this kind of quiescent state where they're not going to be fully active, and they need those food reserves in order to make sure that they have the energy to make it through. So that's looking ahead from now, but it all starts right now being really proactive of monitoring and keeping those Varroa mites under control. So with that, I want to make sure that we have enough time to address the timely topic. The timely topic is the Varroa control products. We've been talking about the importance of monitoring and making sure you know how many mites are within your colonies. But really what the question is, once you have that information, what can you do about it? And perhaps more importantly, what are some of the things that you hear from people that you can do that you actually really can't? And so luckily we have Pat Jones from the NCDA, who's in the Pesticide Division, which is actually a separate but very collaborative division within the NCDA from the apiary inspectors. And so Lewis, Don, John, and Adolphus are with us from the apiary inspection side. But Pat is in charge of the Pesticide Division, has been really, really critical in liaising with beekeepers about the rules and regulations around the pesticides. And so, again, I'm going to open this up and just kind of lead a general discussion here to talk about these Varroa control products. And so what I've done here, just to simplify it, because, again, we only have about 15 minutes to talk about this, is kind of talk about these three different buckets, these three different categories of things that beekeepers can do. And so the first category are proactive techniques. And I really like how Lewis used that same terminology, which is things that hopefully you've been doing all along as you've been keeping bees this season, in order to flatten the curve, right? In order to make the growth curve of the Varroa mites as shallow as possible so that they don't accelerate and get out of hand. Some of these options, this is not a comprehensive list, but some of the more popular ones are screen bottom boards, using genetic stocks that have been demonstrated to be hygienic towards Varroa mites to keep their populations down, doing things like drone brood trapping, where you can take advantage of the mite's proclivity of wanting to parasitize the drone brood over the worker brood. And you can take those frames of drone comb and kill off all the mites before they emerge with the next generation of mites. Yet another one is where you can induce some sort of brood break, either by splitting your colonies and then going through a queenless period, or by caging a queen onto a frame so that there isn't a huge amount of brood for those phoretic mites to jump back in the cells and to continue to reproduce. So all of these things, they take a little bit of work, some of them more than others, but it definitely is a good way to kind of passively keep those mite levels down. So hopefully that if you've been doing these kind of things all season long, you're still in that green zone where you have less than 1% of your bees infested with the mites. Am I missing any critical ones here that should get a shout out as far as these proactive techniques?
Those are the popular ones, and it's just, you kind of have to add all this stuff up and monitor and see if it's getting where you want to go, and you may have to keep adding which is, I think, is where we're going next.
There are some other things like powdered sugar and some of these other things, but empirically, those things have not really been shown to work, so I didn't really include them here. But there are some other things out there, but again, they're passive, and hopefully it just kind of keeps those numbers down to begin with. But if you start to kind of get into that danger zone or the orange zone, between 1% to 3% of your mites, there are some reactive options that you have for controlling the Varroa mites to knock them back down so that their numbers don't continue to grow. So these are, what you could consider as softer options, softer compounds that will kill off the Varroa mites. So some of them are things like formic acid, which comes in the label of Formic Pro. There are these residues that come from beer making from hops called HopGuard, and they have kind of a new version of that, HopGuard 3, which is available. There are 2 thymol-based products, so that's an essential oil from the thymus plant called ApiGuard and ApiLife Var. They kind of have different ways that you implement them within the colony, but in essence, it turns the colony into a fumigation chamber so that it kills off the mites. And then there's an oxalic acid registered product called Bioxal that can be delivered in different ways. And so I want to open these up to discussion about kind of the pros and cons of each. And I know that there are varying opinions on this. I'll just give you kind of my take. One of the things that's important to know is that both HopGuard and the Bioxal are really only supposed to be used, or I should say, they're really only demonstrated to be effective when there's no brood in the colony. So a lot of beekeepers use this as kind of a winter or overwintering option rather than during the season, because most of the mites within a colony at any given time is in the brood, and this doesn't affect that at all. And so I think those are kind of off-season uses. Would people agree with that?
Absolutely. I would say for all of these, smaller colonies with less capped brood, they're going to be more effective. If you have a very large colony with a lot of capped brood and a lot of mites, that's going to be a tough one. That's going to be a tough hump to get over. Mm-hmm. So I wish there were a one-size-fits-all solution that we could just say, oh, just use this, you'll be fine. But we don't have that. Yeah. All these kind of have different parameters where they're able to work. Not all, they're not perfect. There's certainly risk associated with the treatments. Yeah. But I would say that the risk associated with high mite loads far outweighs the risk associated with the treatments. But please don't think that that it's just I can just treat all the time without cost, because there can be issues. But I will say that I'm thrilled to death that we have these plus 3 other registered products that are available to us. I think it's kind of a miracle of science that we have these things that can kill a small bug on a big bug without doing too much damage to the big bug. So I think that's pretty cool.
So Pat Jones, I'm going to bring this into you, and I know that you have some slides here, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that you can do the same. That I know that what Lewis was just talking about there, about that there's a lot of confusion about these litany of different options that we have. So sometimes it can get kind of confusing where it's not so simple that this is the one thing that you do, right? So because we have a lot of these different options, there's a lot of kind of off-label, or I should say misuse of some of these same active ingredients, where really we should be sticking to the registered products, correct?
Unmute, Pat.
There you go. Have to turn my mic down. We'll share a little bit on the pesticide products, what they look like, what you would expect to see on a registered pesticide as far as the format of the label and the use directions. We'll go over some of the definitions that we deal with on the regulatory side. And I realize regulatory affairs are not always the hot topic, but it's where we are with this. Everybody wants enforcement for somebody else, I guess. If I'm going down I-40, I always want the highway patrolman to pull the guy who passes me regardless of my speed. So that's kind of about the way regs are, I think. But with NCDA, we are the regulatory lead agency in the state for pesticide use. We work under EPA grant. We do a lot of the federal inspections. So sometimes we'll talk about FIFRA, the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, Rodenticide Act, which is the federal law. And we'll also talk about the North Carolina pesticide law that we have here. We work under both laws here in North Carolina. We have primacy over use with our North Carolina law. The federal law takes place with the manufacture and the labeling and the uses of the pesticides, but the actual use we cover in North Carolina for the applicators here. So everybody always asks, what is a pesticide? Back when I was a young kid and started as a pesticide inspector, most of the old farmers only thought a pesticide was anything with the skull and crossbones. All the other stuff wasn't a pesticide, it was the real bad stuff that was a pesticide. But our functional definition is a product that kills living things to help us out economically and look after crops, our bees. But our legal definition, and this is one that we need to spend time with, it's a pesticide is any substance or mixture of substance intended to prevent or kill a pest or destroy a pest. So pretty much anything that anybody claims that will kill something is a pesticide. Now in the pesticide world, if somebody sprays, what does everybody talk about now? Vinegar and soap and salt. If somebody sprays that and kills crabgrass, our terrible weed that we have in the summertime, nobody really cares. But you can't make up a substance of any sort and use in a beehive, because we are trying to produce natural honey, sell it as organic. You want everybody to be able to eat your honey and not have to worry about illegal residues. There's all kinds of tolerances for honey for those products that are registered for use. So you really can't just mix up any substance that you want to use in there. We talk about a registered pesticide. It'll have this format of a label. You'll always have a product name. You'll always have use directions up there in the upper left that you see. And it says right up there in the upper left, it is a violation of federal law to use this product in a manner inconsistent with its labeling. Every pesticide will have that on there. And you'll also see the EPA reg number down here in the bottom. That definitely tells you it's an EPA registered product. Okay? And it'll always have the manufacturer's address, the inerts, and the active ingredients, which you'll know it's a pesticide. Under federal law, they have a definition there in the violative acts where it says it shall be unlawful for any person to use any registered pesticide in a manner inconsistent with its labeling that we saw. There are some exceptions that allows us to use less if we want to. We can also apply it any way we want to as long as it's not prohibited on the label. So beekeepers are somehow creative in ways we apply products, which is really okay as long as the pesticide is registered. But it has to be registered first, then you can kind of apply it how you want to. Under the state law, it's a little different. You'll see it's a little more stringent, as it is any, not anybody can use any pesticide, not just a registered pesticide, but you cannot use any pesticide in a manner consistent with its labeling. So if you make up something, it is in fact a pesticide. And if you make up something, there is no label there to tell you how to use it, what rate you should use it, what you should wear to protect yourself. It's just not there. So you are off label, as we say in the pesticide world, from the get-go. There's no way to apply an illegal product legally, I guess is the best way to say it. And with that brings up reminders to our beekeepers. Only use, and we'll say this several times, only use a pesticide that is approved for use in the hive. It will have those directions there for the rate. It'll have your temperature restrictions, how much to use per frame of brood, how long to leave it in, when to take it out. All those will be spelled out. You don't have to guess. You don't have to go online and ask somebody in your bee club how to use it. It's on the label. Read the label. Don't Google and see what Billy Bob uses to treat his bees. It's on the label and it'll tell you everything you need to do. Follow that.
Pat, let's circle back really quickly to that previous slide that I had here, which is which of these products, and I know the answer to this, is there the most confusion over this about using the chemical in the label, but you're not using the labeled product? Which are the ones that tend to be used a lot in that kind of off-label way, either intentionally or mistakenly, just unintentionally?
You're talking about the oxalic acid products and the bleach?
Yeah, and even some of the formic ones do too, right? Yeah.
Right.
So define for us, just to make it very clear, buying wood bleach and using that in place of this epibioxal is not approved or legal in any way, right?
No, that's like what I'm saying. You're taking an illegal product.
Yep.
There's no way to make it legal. There's no use directions on there.
Yep.
If you remember back years ago, remember when beekeepers were using the illegal products to fumigate their hives out in the Midwest?
Mm-hmm.
EPA does not take that lightly. That was very could kill beekeepers if they misused it, if they tripped inside the house while they were fumigating, it could kill them. So EPA looks at this with a real strong arm, that you don't just use something illegally, or just because it has the same active ingredient does not make it legal to use. Exactly. You've got to have that label for the use directions on how to use it correctly.
And for the harm to the bees as well.
Sure.
Right? I mean, so really, I mean, some of these things, they're not benign in any way, even though they might be softer kind of biopesticides. They can be very harmful to the beekeeper by breathing. You need, respirators and those kind of things to do it correctly. But to the bees as well. I mean, you're turning the hive into a fumigation chamber. Right. And if you don't have the correct ratio of all of these different things, it can spell disaster for the bees too. Correct.
And like I say, we are trying to produce a natural honey, and you don't want to mess up and get something that's off label or have residues in that honey either. So,
yeah. Well, I appreciate that, Pat. Everybody, in North Carolina is in really, really good hands when it comes to kind of understanding these things. And we should all realize that you're there to help beekeepers and not, kind of come down on everybody really hard, but more to just understand the rights and the wrongs and find our way through this kind of difficult, minefield that we have here.
Right.
So the last bucket, and I just want to kick this back to Lewis and Pat again, and anybody else can jump in, is when beekeepers are in that kind of red zone, when they're above that 3%, real problematic threshold, the synthetic acaricides, the ones that are pesticides intended to kill mites, are available, and these are the ones that are registered for that. Now, again, these are suggested that you use these as a last resort, and especially these two on the right, the apistan and the check mite, which are fluvalinate and coumaphos respectively, their active ingredients. They've been registered for a really, really long time, so there's pretty rampant mite resistance to those compounds, so they very well might not work. So if you do use those, you definitely have to do a follow-up monitoring to make sure that they are effective. The newest one on the market is this one here, the Apivar. Of course, if you're in that red zone, you can still use some of those other ones. Just, realize that. But kind of as last resort, you want to, have all of the tools at the disposal. Any other comments or discussion on that? Do other inspectors across the state still see noticeable resistance, especially to the Apistan and check mite?
We haven't really been making a recommendation for Apistan in a long time.
Okay, that's what I thought.
It was an excellent product when it first came out.
Yeah.
It's still registered though, correct?
It's still registered.
Right, it's still registered. Yep.
That's when we started doing all of our outreach, was when the mites were resistant to Apistan. We came out with check mite with the Section 18, and everybody had to be certified to use it. It was when we started a lot of our outreach to beekeepers.
Yeah.
Long time ago.
Yeah.
98.
Yeah.
I wouldn't recommend using check mite now either to anybody that I'm aware of.
Right. So I would say Apivar is on the table, but I would not recommend Apistan or check mite.
Yep.
And we can see some resistance to Apivar, so it's not a slam dunk.
My goodness.
There's also problems with Apistan. That product's getting in the wax and staying there for an extremely long time. And that's
Both
not
of them.
good.
Checks mite's even worse than that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Kumafoss is really, really bad. So
Yep.
I wouldn't recommend either one of those two.
Yep.
For Apivar, at least it shows some resistance. But if you use an IPM, it's still on the table.
Yep.
And it doesn't seem to stay in the wax. It seems to vaporize on out eventually.
Right. So, I think all of these are different options, right? And hopefully, if you're managing all along and keeping the mite levels down, these aren't needed. And that's the IPM approach. That's what you want to get towards, right? But the only way to know what situation every single colony is in is if you monitor for it and then take appropriate action. And there are many options out there, but don't get fooled or confused by some of the recommendations that can be out there for these kind of home mixes and home remedies. So be very, very aware of that. If you have any questions, feel free to contact Cooperative Extension, the apiary inspectors, or Pat's division as well. They'll be happy to help you through with all of that. Any other last comments before we start talking about something fun?
David, also like the looking at the temperature range you can use these in.
Yeah, that's a good point. So I'll go back to this one. So the Formic, I think you can't use it when the daytime temperatures are above 90. So this can really rule out. And I think the Apolife VAR is actually like that too. I'm forgetting offhand the exact temperature.
You can use the half dose when it's over 77 degrees.
Okay.
And I've got people using it, having really good results right now.
Okay, well that's good. That's good to hear. But again, all of that's on the label, right, Pat? They tell all of that kind of stuff right there on the label. So buying that registered product so that you have those marching orders about the precise way to apply them. It's not easy. It takes a lot of homework. So being proactive about if and when things go wrong is important as well.
Yes.
So thank you guys for all of that. But I always feel horrible about talking about the doom and gloom of all of our honeybee colonies and their demise because of Varroa mites and everything. We got to remember that we got into beekeeping because it's fun, and it is fun a lot of times of the year. So let's segue and transition to talking about some real positive aspects about bees and beekeeping, and that is to invest in the younger generation so that there's going to be bees and beekeeping for many, many years to come. And luckily here in North Carolina, we have a team both at NC State and in the State Beekeepers Association of trying to foster and augment the 4-H programs, specifically when it comes to bees and beekeeping. So I'd like to introduce Liz Driscoll, who's an extension specialist, 4-H specialist here at NC State University with a part-time appointment in the Department of Entomology, as well as Chris Apple and Robert Smith, who are both on the NCSBA 4-H committee and some of the initiatives that they have going on. And I'm going to stop sharing so that we can see them and say hello.
Thanks so much for having.
Sure, no
me.
problem.
Do you
Chris,
want-
Robert, you guys there?
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay, just wanted to make sure.
absolutely.
Just want everybody so that they can see who you are. Liz, I know you have a couple slides here, so go ahead and start sharing your screen. But you've been working on 4-H curricula at different age levels for a really, really long time. These things are not just done with a snap of the finger. And so the heavy lifting and the amount of work that you've done to facilitate other efforts in this area has really been enormous.
Yeah, you know, I feel like I have the best job in the world. I love kids. I love all things that, you know, flitter, flutter, fly, buzz, creep, crawl, dig, you know, all of it. And so really, you know, that's my position, is that I'm with Cooperative Extension at NC State, and my role is to support youth specifically through 4-H to grow their excitement and understanding of all things bugs, as well as plants and soil and things like that as well. But today, definitely putting on my entomology hat. And so, you know, one of the ways that, you know, we feel like 4-H philosophy, you know, is to both not only engage kids, but also to, you know, work with the, you know, caring adult leaders that are facilitating all the fun across the state. And so, you know, as you all know, we've got, you know, extension agents in, you know, every county and with the Eastern Band of Cherokee in North Carolina, and all of them, you know, have the potential to work with volunteers in their community, like the amazing beekeepers that are tucked in every hill and holler and beach across the state. And so I feel like we have such a rich possibility, as I was telling Chris earlier, to make some mischief and, you know, get that next generation fired up about bees. So I thought what I would do is I would share a couple of just bee-specific projects that we've been working on, and then you know, we can go from there with questions and more conversations and so forth. And Chris and Robert, you know, jump in how you want. So really kind of what I wanted to just share out today was tell you about some of the resources that we've developed, some additional what I'm calling supplemental resources that are partly a COVID response, kind of some training efforts we're hoping for. And then as I'm talking, everybody's job is to think of some further ways to collaborate, because I know there's already so much going on. There's a lot of beekeepers that have helped out with projects that we've done already that are doing really cool things in the counties across the state already with extension and on their own. So there's just so much fun to be had. So this is just a picture of some of the curriculum that we've recently and finally kind of rolled out. We the way that, you know, 4-H works is, you know, we start by trying to have a resource that incorporates hands-on activities, right? 4-H is learn by doing. I'm sorry if you can hear my loud dog in the background. Learn by doing, and to really understand everything about bees in this sort of experiential way. And so it's not necessarily a beekeeping curriculum per se. We're not teaching young people in this particular resource, like how to take care of Varroa mites and things like that. Although I'm hoping that this is something that would lead into that. So this might be like, all right, we're going to go out into the school garden or a community garden or our backyard, and we're going to do pollinator observations. You know, what pollinators do you see? What of those pollinators are bees? You know, what are those different kinds of bees? Are they honey bees? Are they native bees? You know, are they nesting in the ground, in a tree stump, and so forth? So you might do that through things like observation. We've got some bee life cycle yoga. We've got some games in there, all kinds of mischief. And so all of these are 100% available through extension. And so the only reason we do that is just to connect you specifically with your extension folks. And I know they'd be delighted to talk to you more. So we have one on sort of early elementary. We've got one for 4th grade. And then, you know, so many people that just love being outdoors and love bees also love all their pollinators. So we did one specifically on butterflies as a response to so many schools do life cycles. And sometimes they're doing embryology with, chicken eggs, but this is another complement to that. And so it's about raising painted lady butterflies, but understanding sort of bigger butterfly ecology. So anyway, so those are some resources. Love to share those out to y'all. We also have started to try to develop a couple of what I'm just calling supplemental resources, where sometimes, it's like when you're, okay, sorry, I didn't want those to accidentally play. Check these out, they're on Extension's YouTube channels. And so sometimes it's helpful when you're triceps and, you can't necessarily observe some of it close up. So we had a couple of animations that were made to illustrate just to a kid-friendly audience specifically. And so kind of along this line, I'm gonna sort of go ahead. We were trying to take all of these resources that we put together and for this spring to try to take this out across the state and train educators, whether, folks that are beekeepers that love working with youth, our teachers that are working in their classrooms, our 4-H volunteer leaders, master gardeners, whoever is working with kids in a way, and sort of basically train them on these activities, so how can you act out a bee pupa when you're doing yoga? We would totally show you how to do that. Get your stretching in too. So we all know COVID happened, and so those were all canceled despite our really well-laid plans. And so kind of one of the things that we're thinking about trying to do is, how do we take this into sort of a format like Dr. Tarpey has done? What are some, David, you're awesome at your online offerings for forever. And so we're trying to catch up to something like that. And again, I'm wide open to ideas and brainstorming. And so if folks are interested in supporting something like this or participating, then, definitely let's connect up.
And there's a really great synergy and collaboration going on with the NCSBA. So Chris and Robert, you guys have, among the beekeeper associations, really been doing a lot with 4-H and local 4-H extension agents and everything. But all of these things are really coming together in a really exciting way. So explain what you guys have been up to.
Well, one of the things that is really exciting to us beekeepers tapping into the 4-H is that a lot of beekeepers are really older, and when each time I have the opportunity to work with youth, their enthusiasm and their excitement is just really rewarding, and it kind of starts a process where I get even more excited about what I'm doing. And the NCSBA graciously has decided that this is a really good place for us to put a little bit of money to stimulate some interest in some of the kids across the state. The bottom line is, across the state, Extension does so much for so many of our chapters. And we felt like reaching out to the kids in 4-H would be a really good way for us to start paying back for a lot of the opportunities that the extension services have given our chapters. We have decided as an organization to offer grants to chapters that are interested in working with their 4-H extension agents to put together programs that will enhance these 4-H kids learning about bees. And one of the things that all of the opportunities that Liz, the learning opportunities that Liz has just presented here, I think are a big stumbling block for a lot of the chapters who are interested in doing this. And so we have these $500 grants. It's fairly easy to get one. You can do something like a 2-day bee school for kids. And of course, at this point with COVID in the middle of everything, it's going to take a lot more work, and it's going to have to be a lot of virtual interactions until things kind of straighten out a bit. But there's a lot of opportunities out there to get involved with these kids in 4-H across the state. And I think it's probably because of COVID. We had a lot of interested chapters, and then spring hit, and things sort of got jumbled up with all of pandemic issues. Really, the interest. I'm really grateful to David to give us this opportunity to kind of send out the word across the state that these grants are available. They're very, very helpful to your chapters as far as being able to tap resources in the community that you can then bring through educational experiences to be lifetime beekeepers that will then keep your chapter going, because old and kind of fall by the wayside, we need new blood coming in. So I just want to think about this, and especially since Liz has these great resources there, to think about ways that you might offer some sort of programs to the 4-H in your chapter's area. There have been programs that have been very rewarding. There have been things such as bringing a group of kids the whole way through the summer with raising queens to something just as simple as a 2-day introduction. And so I just want to encourage folks to think about this. Now that we're stuck at home, it's a good time to do a little bit of work on trying to put an online program together for the kids in your area.
Yeah, I was going to bring Robert into that conversation and ask about some of the examples, not using Liz's stuff yet, but some of the previous examples before these kind of collaborative opportunities can really start taking off. What are some past examples that you know of and that you've been involved in?
Several of the chapters in my area already had programs working with the 4-H.
Exactly.
Before this pandemic hit. I just became part of the committee right in the middle of the pandemic, so I have not been able to do a lot of the work I intend to do to encourage the local chapters to get involved with their local 4-H. But in my area, we have, with the 4-H kids, we have set up training programs. We've had local sponsors to provide the woodenware, provide new colonies of bees, and really get the kids involved. And the local chapters have provided mentors that work with the 4-H children, and it's been very successful. Several of the chapters in the western part of the state have gotten grants and are using those just for the 4-H children.
No, that's terrific, and I just really see this poised of just completely taking off, and really once we kind of get back to normal, whatever that's going to be, I just see a lot of these opportunities where there's just going to be a lot of really exciting things that hopefully these different groups can share among them and among the extension agents, the 4-H agents, so that everybody can learn from each other about things that work and things that don't, so that it can just continue to build. So I think everything that's been going on, I think, is really, really exciting and reminds us that beekeeping is not all about Varroa mites. So that's really great. Well, we're in the kind of last segment here, which is just an open Q&A, and there's just been tons of questions flying in. Oh, I'm sorry. Am I frozen? Uh-oh.
I just need to move. I think
Well, I'm just going to continue to talk as if this was a live a live stream, which it is. But the last segment is a open Q&A. And so let me scan some here to see if there's any questions about the 4-H. There's one here about how to get in touch with Liz and Chris and Robert about these 4-H things. And so we put some of their contact information on the YouTube chat there. Let's go through and see some of the questions about the Varroa mites, of which there were plenty. Sharon, did you have a list of some that were curated, or should I just kind of scan through real quick?
I made a list of everything that I saw.
Okay.
And some of them, see, the last one I'll start with is most instructions say so much per brood chamber. Are they assuming 10 frame deeps? If so, how do you adjust for 8s?
That's a great question. I think they are for 10 frame standard, but I think it's just the size of the brood nest. But there isn't any wording on the labels that account for the number of frames, right? You don't reduce the dose or the application by the frame size, do you?
No, the labels vary. Sometimes it'll say, something about Apivar says 1 strip for every 5 frames of bees. But I would say for like something for like Apiguard, you know, I would say an 8 frame and a 10 frame deep are equal.
That's the same.
It's just, okay, yeah. So where it's important, it's addressed on the label. And where perhaps it's not all that important, because a lot of these, you know, you have the ones that turn the hive into a fumigation chamber, and then there's others where it's a contact, so that the contact ones may not be as critical for the amount.
Also, sometimes the label will say you have to have a minimum number of frames and a maximum number of frames. So like for formic acid, if you have less than 6 frames of bees, it's going to be too hard on the bees.
Yep.
If you have more than 20 frames of bees, it's not going to be hard enough on the mites.
Yep.
And so certainly, if you're not sure, call your apiary inspector, and we can help try to interpret them. So the labels sometimes can be tricky to interpret, and we're happy to help you with
one of the trickier aspects of the fumigants is, again, using screen bottom boards and calculating that into the weather.
Mm-hmm.
You do need to be aware that it might be too cozy, or it might not be cozy enough.
But that's not on the label, right? And that really only comes with experience and
judgment call. Yeah.
The other thing is most of the manufacturers have good websites with frequently asked questions. The manufacturers want you to have a good experience.
Yeah.
They want you to get the most bang for your buck, and so they have lots of tips and tricks. You know, so how you can follow the label and also get, you know, be most effective with the treatment. They want you to have a good time with it, and they've done a lot of research on that, and they want to share it with you. So seek that out.
That's a really good point. Really good point. Here's another really good question about somebody who they don't want to use the, I'm assuming, synthetic acaricides, right? So they want to use some of those softer chemicals, and they're already at 3% right now, but they want to wait a couple more weeks so that the weather gets just a bit cooler so they can use the Formic Pro products. To me, that seems like that certainly is an option, but you also then realize that you're introducing a little more risk, right? So what would be the apiary inspector's recommendations for a situation like that?
Look at the weather last year, David. We had extreme heat all the way into late October. So if you wait till late October, early November to treat, you might have missed the bus.
Yep.
And the mite load and virus load would be so high that you're really trying to pull it out of the hole that you might not be able to pull it out of.
Great point. And we can predict the weather, you know, a good week or so, you know, ahead now, rather than only just a day or so. But yeah, you don't want to wait too long. So if the, you know, weather looks like it might be kind of going down for the next week or so, then that might be an option. But if it's going to stay warm, for another week or so, then probably you might want to think about some of the other products. I know that ApiGuard is much more tolerant, or can be used in higher temperature situations. Is that correct?
Yeah, you can use. You got to cut your dose in half.
Yeah. Explain that, John. So
basically, if it's over 77 degrees, if you follow the label, it's telling you, it is very specific on the label. It will tell you to cut the dose in half. Yeah. So basically, instead of doing the 51 milliliters, you're going to 25 milliliters, and it'll tell you, and it tells you how many, the period of time in between. So instead of 51, where you go 2 weeks, you would go to a week or to 10 days, and it's got it specifically written on the label, so it pays to read that label.
So there's some other questions about kind of why and when you do that, and you just kind of partially answered that, but not the why. So why is cutting it in half when the temperature is over a certain amount important?
When that temperature is high, it's gassing off, and then you could actually make the hive abscond, and just like the formic acid, you get in a car with formic acid and open it up in this heat, you won't do it again. I mean, it's those things that.
So it's bad for the bees. It's bad for the bees.
It's so important to follow the label. I mean, they've researched this. They know where it works and how it works. And like I said, I've got people in my area, I've used it personally, and I've got people in my area who have used it and have excellent results right now.
No, that's great. And any other comments on that last one about the half dose at higher temperatures? Okay. There's another question here about if oxalic acid leaves a residue, in that it doesn't penetrate the wax capping. I'm not quite sure I understand that question, but I guess the one comment there, right, is that oxalic does not penetrate the wax capping, so it's not controlling the mites that are in the brood cells, which again is 70-75% of the mites in the colony at any given time. But it also doesn't leave a residue so that it sticks around when those mites emerge, that they then get controlled. Is that correct?
Correct. So think of oxalic or apophylaxyl as a flash treatment. It's going to kill mites on adult bees that day. It's not going to hang around, and so it's not going to touch that stuff in the cat brood. And that's what we really need to get to this time of year.
And so unlike some of the other fumigant, the Formic Pro and other the Thymol, the essential oil treatments, those are gassing off continuously over a week or so as it's in there. The oxalic is just a momentary thing. So any mites that emerge the next day are not going to be affected at all by the oxalic acid, right? Which is why it really isn't all that effective, and it shouldn't be used when there's lots of brood in the colony with hatching mites, right?
Exactly.
Yep. There's a question here about fluvalinate and coumaphos is found in the wax foundation that beekeepers buy from beekeeping supply companies. That is absolutely true. I don't know of any really up-to-date surveys of that, but from surveys 10 or more years ago, when those products were a lot more commonplace, they were indeed ubiquitous. Now, right. The levels that you buy it in the foundation can vary a lot, but the persistence of these things is yet another reason why I think it was unanimously said that these are really not recommended, even though they are still labeled and options, only as a very, very last resort for any number of reasons. Does anybody else know, Pat, do you know if there's any kind of newer data on some of the residue analyses in beeswax with some of these compounds?
I've not heard of any newer data. Like I said, back when colony collapse first came over, started, USDA did a lot of that research, and found lots of chemicals in the wax because it holds on to it for so long. But I hadn't heard of any new studies.
Well, it's one of those things where if we just had unlimited resources and time and, you know, energy and everything else, it would be great if that was kind of an ongoing thing, right? It'd be nice to have kind of recurring data like that to see if that has changed for the better or for the worse, and just kind of stay on top of that. But I don't know, maybe there'll be an effort like that.
Both of those products, the active ingredient had been used off-label for both of those products as well. And I think that most of the residue that's likely to be picked up in wax probably came from off-label use.
Yeah.
You know, particularly in the case of the Apistan, it is persistent, but not at a level that would be, you know, above a tolerance.
Yeah, that was one thing I had in some of the slides. It's important to take the products out after the prescribed treatment time. In the Apistan, it was just left in the hives too long. Right. And so it built up in the wax, and you got resistance to the product just because of the overuse of it and not taking it out of the hive. The treatment period is really important to follow.
I'm just going to leave with a couple last comments because I realize we're after 8 o'clock. But there's a couple questions in the chat thread that are talking about monitoring and some of those different options. Again, I urge you to go and watch the recording of Apiculture Online 2 weeks ago, because we cover a lot of that in really nice detail. There's another quick question about if there are different Varroa mites on different types of bees, say Italians versus Russians versus Carniolans and those kind of things. The answer to that very quickly is no. The mites are just as willing to infect others. Now, some of those different strains may be more tolerant to them because they remove them from the brood cells before they have a chance to emerge, but they will just as readily infect them. And because we're moving bees all around and buying bees from all different corners of the U.S., we don't have any kind of segregation of the mite types. That they're pretty much all the same, or equally in infestation probability of different types of colonies. But definitely try those different stocks out because a lot of people really like them, keeping those mite levels low. Well, I wish that we could just keep going on. I want to make sure that we end on time. But I definitely want to thank, again, all the apiary inspectors of the NCDA, Pat Jones of the NCDA Pesticide Division, and then Liz Driscoll, Chris Apple, and Robert Smith, who are all doing really great things on 4-H, and to remind us that there are really beneficial things to talk about bees and beekeeping as well. Before we leave, I do want to remind everybody of the next Apiculture Online. Unfortunately, usually, even though we've been doing this every other week, pretty much since COVID hit, our next one is going to be 4 weeks from now, because 2 weeks from today is we're going to have a USDA workshop, a virtual workshop that's going to tie me up and others. And so we're going to take a very small hiatus, but we'll resume in September 23rd. When Jennifer Keller is going to be talking about small hive beetles and some of the other things that you might be looking out for this time of year. And then we're going to have our interview guest of Dr. James Wilkes, who is the founder of Hive Tracks and professor in Appalachian State University. And so he's going to join us, and we can chat about various technical aspects of recording your data of your colonies. And so until then, thanks again, everybody, for joining us. Thanks to our guests, and hopefully we'll see you next time.